Hi, I'm Dr. Joel Kreisberg, and today I'm here with my colleague Tim Owens, and we're going to talk about the journey of inspiring homeopathy. Tim, today I'd like to really try and understand what is the difference between the use of the remedy rust tox in a conventional homeopathic setting versus how we use it in inspiring homeopathy.
Oh, well, that's a that's a big question. It has to go back through my history as a homeopath. Like many homeopaths who started back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had limited materia medica, and a great deal of what we learned about remedies came through the lens of acute prescribing. When I started out, my understanding of rhus tox was that it was a remedy that was wonderful for treating strains and sprains and stiffness and a basic sort of acute arthritic kind of presentation. And I learned about it and used it happily for really decades. And for the most part, I treated rhus tox the way many homeopaths treat hypericum or treat ledum or treat remedies that are in our acute kits and that we use acutely, but basically dismiss from serious classical homeopathy. So I would, when somebody came in and told me an intake visitation, gave me an intake, and I heard them describe the deep and complex systems that we hear in these kinds of things, I would almost never think of using a remedy like rhus tox to address that. Somewhere in around about 2008, I traveled to France and I studied with Tina Smits, and I took his course on inspiring homeopathy. And while there, I experienced the remedy internally in a subjective way, and then listened to Tina speak about it, and then I read about it, and it was an absolute revelation. And what I came to appreciate about rhus tox is that it's one of the major remedies of our materia medica, and since rethinking and revisiting my understanding of it has forced me to see that rhus is a remedy you really need to think about when people come in with the kind of deep trauma that they often bring into our clinical settings. So now when I look at rhus, when I hear somebody who has one of those traumatic kinds of histories where they were abused, where they were screwed over in some way by their early life, especially when I hear resentment, where this is still locked into them, I immediately start thinking about rhus tox. And it has now moved from the acute shelf, where I certainly still use it, but really to being a frontline, call it a polycrest remedy. I think it is an enormous remedy, and I think there are so many people out there walking around with all sorts of trauma that rhus is a remedy that has to be understood.
So what I hear, a couple of things that you said. One of them is that part of the changing of your relationship with it is that you actually had to take the remedy in a learning setting.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Studying with Tinas at his villa in France really was a revelation. He did crazy things. He said, if you want to know a remedy, you should take it. Now, certainly, if you read the Organon closely, you'll know there's a footnote where Hahnemann says, if you really want to know your remedies, you need to prove them on yourself. But certainly when I was becoming a homeopath, nobody really took that all that seriously. Yes, in the better schools, you would have the experience occasionally of some provings, and really serious homeopaths would engage in provings. But what Tinas proposed when I went to France was, hey, let's prove 7 remedies in a handful of days. We were there for 5 days, and in that time, we proved 7 or 8 remedies, taking 2 a day. And it was, by the time I'd arrived there and really came to understand what he was suggesting, I might have turned around and gone home if I'd really thought about it, because I thought it was crazy. And yet, what I found each time I did it was that, curiously, you learn what you needed you learned what you needed from the remedy, and it was as if it just sort of shut itself off when it was time. So I would do a remedy in the morning, have the experience of the remedy, go have lunch, come back in, and I'd feel pretty clear. I would do a second remedy in the afternoon, and once again, I would have the experience of the remedy, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon, he was gone. It was as if he created a context where it's almost as if the remedy knew what its job was. It was to reveal itself. It was to do so in a limited period of time and then fade to black so that the person could go live his life. And if I hadn't done it repeatedly, I'd think it was nuts. But it worked.
Well, no, it's interesting. And so what he did, what I hear you describing, is changing your relationship with the remedies from one of learning about the remedy, which is the way we study materia medica. So we see great teachers showing us videos, reading it in books, to actually changing my relationship with the remedy to a first person. I take the remedy and have an experience, or a second person in which I take the remedy, you take the remedy, we share our experiences in a safety circle. And so I will say that, you know, the word proving triggers people. And so some would say that's not approving. I'm not sure if we're going to argue whether it is or it isn't, but we are going to say it is learning about remedies by taking them and understanding them in first person.
Yeah, I don't mean to confuse and suggest that it's a formal classical proving. I've certainly participated in those. I know what they're like. I know what they require. And with all due respect to Samuel Hahnemann and some of the contemporary homeopaths who have revisited this process, that has its place. But I think that Tinas essentially uncovered some other aspect of it. In fact, what it reminds me of more than anything else is some of the stuff that I've read with, the homeopath, he died some years ago. It's where you and I met when we went to Whitman, Ed Whitman. And Ed had this attitude towards remedies that in some ways they had personalities and that you interact with them. Mm. And that's very much what I discovered when I spent that time with Tinas, that the remedies have personalities and they reveal themselves to you, and they do so, dare I say, almost in a conscious way. It's as if the remedy has an identity and a personality that just says, oh yeah, you want to find out about me? Okay, you have 2 hours? All right, I'll show you what you need. And then it just goes away.
Well, interesting, because that actually is what I hear is a lot of 20th century philosophy, which is that you're having a relationship with the remedy when you
Absolutely.
It that way. And so in Tinas's system, the relationship was set up in a sacred circle, so you took a remedy every half a day, right?
It was shamanistic in some ways. I mean, in some ways, Tinas was a shaman. He brought you into that little circle. He created a safe space. He taught you how to protect yourself. And then when you took the remedy, he had complete control over the whole situation. Mm. And of course, he was also absolutely in line with what you and I are trying to do in this process, and that is, you would begin with the subjective experience of the remedy, and then he would go around the circle and make sure every single participant had a chance to talk out loud about what they experienced. And during the course of that, there would be both the listening and then occasionally questioning and back and forth. So we had that second person experience. And then at the conclusion of that, Tinas would reach in his little bag and pull out some cases, describe what he saw from the remedy, and then read some cases that would explain how that actually appears in the clinic, and how what you learned in the first and second person sense would then reveal itself in a more objective third person way when somebody sits across from you in the clinic. So it was a remarkable experience.
No, it's nice. And so our modifications are what we're doing with it at this point is we're turning it into something that, since it's hard to get us all in a circle together, we're using this technology. This is exact technology where you can sit in your home anywhere in the United States and have this first person experience. Everybody has the remedies. Everybody takes the remedies. Everybody shares the remedy. We also add to it, adding a journaling process. So we use online forums to actually allow you to literally write some of your experience and have other colleagues in your class actually see and share with you your reflections upon the process. And then the next step is actually starting to look at some of the the opportunities that taking these remedies have. So when we look at rust tox, Smith actually begins to articulate it as a layer. So tell us about the rust tox. What is the layer that he associates with rust tox?
Yeah. Well, I look at it a couple of ways. Unresolved traumas of the past, particularly when, it's the second way I look at ruse is the way I learned it as an acute, and it's applicable here. If I want to teach the remedy ruse in one word, I say stiffness. And I let people just stop and feel that idea of stiffness on every level of someone's being. And so in some sense, when I envision the ruse layer, there's a trauma which strikes the person so intensely that I almost feel them stiffen up and freeze as if they have frozen in time, as if that sequence of past, present, and future just locks into this moment, and the person stiffens up, they freeze, they stop moving. And once that occurs, that carries on indefinitely, and then what comes out of that stiffening up, that freezing, is that later on in life, it's as if it starts to manifest with these secondary symptoms. So, for example, cursing and swearing, or getting angry, or weeping without knowing why, or any of these myriad little symptoms. But all of those seem to go back to this idea of there was a trauma that caused that person to just lock up. I can't move anymore. And then the vital force, in some ways, in its diligence, in its desire to right itself, to return back to a homeostatic state, it starts to put out these messages, these little pieces of information, this data that says to you, you need to go back and look at something. So when somebody is sitting in the chair across from me and I hear those various symptoms, I hear, oh yeah, he really pissed me off, and oh God, I could just kill him. I immediately start thinking, do we have a ruse situation here? And that, frankly, they're very common. There's a lot of this that comes into our office.
Well, no, that's the key piece is they're so common that most of us have this experience in our lives. So that's the other reason why he started talking about these being universal. And so the other piece that we are working with in the journey of inspiring homeopathy is explore our own relationship with trauma, with victim experiences in our life, because whether we're stuck there with a stiffness or whether we move through it in a very healthy way, I can relate to that experience, and somehow either me or my parents or my kids or my grandparents or my tribe, so to speak. So there is some work to be done building our own relationship with universal experiences. And trauma and victim is a universal experience, and the more I can relate to it, the more I'll intuitively recognize it. And so now what we're saying is taking the rust tox in the way you describe as approving or in the sacred circle is giving me a tool for that exploration, to understand the nature of this experience. And so to me, I describe that as homeopathy therefore offers us the ability to grow more capacity. I can grow my capacity to understand suffering and healing by actually taking it in a sacred circle with a bunch of people who are all studying it together.
Yeah, and this would be very often my critique of many of the ways that I have seen homeopathics taught. Too much homeopathy is taught from the third person objective. We get piles of materia medica, we study repertory, we look at books. To a lesser degree, of course, if you're in a school or interacting with a mentor or a coach, you can have something of a second person interaction. But that first person element of it is sadly lacking. There are far too many places where the whole emphasis on get out the book, look at the notes, memorize the keynotes, memorize the materia medica, learn how to use your repertory, and you're left sort of floating on the surface doing that third person objective. In some ways, that's the weakness of modern medicine, is that they pick up a LabCorp sheet and they look at it and they say, oh yeah, you've got anemia or you've got this or that or the other thing. They don't even see a patient. We're seeing lists of symptoms. We're interacting with this surface level. But there's another way. When someone comes into your office and you start to intuit that situation that they're experiencing, it opens up all kinds of doors for a more holistic style of prescribing. And I would think we of all people should appreciate that. It's a whole process. The first, second, and third person are all part of it.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, it's more holistic, but it's also more, I mean, you use the word more intuitive. So I see this as developmental stages of homeopathy or homeopaths. It's like we're actually moving into an era. So the 21st century homeopath is built on the ground of this incredible explosion of knowledge and information that happened in the 80s and 90s and the first decade of the 21st century. But now, well, you can't possibly stuff that all in our heads. So the next developmental phase is to build our ability to feel states that remedies are accessing. That can only really be done through first-person experience, and the safest way of doing that is to do it in groups, where there is a guide and there is a teacher, and you are not just having your own experience, you're able to share your experiences. So, you know, a collection of 12 people to having first-person experiences is just much more profound.
Yeah, and certainly when I worked with Tinas, I had that experience. He did all the things that a good educator would do and a good shaman would do to create that safe space so that in a controlled environment, you could have that subjective experience and then build off of it to become a better homeopath, a better prescriber.
So what we have, we're going to bring this video to a close, but there is a link on this page that will take you to a lecture on, you know, healing trauma with Russ Talks that I did for a conference on trauma in San Francisco in September. And so what it will do is, I mean, there's PowerPoint slides and me talking and teaching the remedy, but we do come to the point where we actually do a guided meditation together. And in the conference itself, I gave everybody a dose of Russ Talks 30C, and they took it together. So if you want to do the journey as a solo, you could do it. You can listen to the remedy, to the journey without taking the remedy, and you will have a positive experience. But it's really allowing you to get a taste of the way we're studying these remedies. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it's about a 55 minute class. It gives you a sense when we're doing it in Journey of Inspiring Homeopathy, we usually do it, it's a 2-hour class. So we have a lot more time to actually really hear how everybody's experience. We also like to break people into partners and have people share their experience one-on-one. And we also like to have them all, when they go home, to share their experiences online so it usually takes a couple of days for everyone to really sort of discharge their experiences, right, which is the first week. And then at that point, begin to do the third person descriptors, and we start talking about cases, and we do these other stuff. And so you could watch, and we're giving this to you for free. It's an hour class on Russ Talks and healing long-term abuse. And if you're interested in finding out more about our program, The Journey of Inspiring Homeopathy, there are some links on the website. And hope if you're interested, tune in, and we're welcome you into our community. So Tim, thank you for taking the time today.
My pleasure.
Take care, everyone.